the criminal justice administration, the criminal justice system, the Indian constitution, and the placement of denotified communities via the legal system. But before that, we are talking about denotified communities, and it's really important that we, understand the relevance of the time when we're talking about denotified communities. We're observing the 150th year of the Criminal Tribes Act 1871 this year, in October, in fact. It's been 150 years to this draconian Criminal Tribes Act. We are also talking of a time when most of us have seen the movie Jai Bhim, and there's been a lot of discussion and talks around the movie. And in fact, the real life story of the community that has been depicted in the movie is of a community called Kuruvar community. Though the movie doesn't, I think, uses a name of another marginalized community, which is a nomadic community as well. But the original story is that of Kuruvar community from Tamil Nadu, which is a denotified community, criminalized, categorized as scheduled caste in Tamil Nadu. And they've been demanding for a scheduled tribe status for a long time. The words like habitual offenders, words like born criminals, thieves, decades, these kind of terms and terminologies have a deep presence and a haunting presence in the lives of denotified communities. And you have seen the movie and you will know what that is. So I wanted to contextualize that first. Coming to the issue of denotified communities, I'm actually going to take this opportunity to present a paper that I've been writing, and I'm in the process of writing. And I actually started thinking of this issue in the backdrop of the George Floyd protests in the US, and the whole hashtag Black Lives Matter movement, that we talked about. And, there were repercussions in India, and, people started saying hashtag Dalit Lives Matter, hashtag Adivasi Lives Matter, and hashtag we created another hashtag, hashtag denotified lives matter. And I thought that in the context of George Floyd's murder, a black man who was murdered by the police official in the US, and the uproar that it had created, and the whole discussion surrounded police brutalities of black lives, that black people are subjected to, the criminal justice system, and how the criminal justice system targets black communities and Latin American communities and indigenous communities, tribal communities in the US, right? What I thought was, what was missing when we adopted that hashtag in India was that we were not talking about denotified tribes and about denotified communities, because in fact, these are the communities who should have been, central to the conversation on custodial murder, custodial torture, police brutality, because that is how, systematically these communities have been, subjected to this kind of targeting by the criminal justice system and the legal system. Before I get into that, I will just I think I want to sort of do a little bit of myth busting around denotified communities or around nomadic communities. And I think Anagha ma'am very well, she has articulated it really well. She's obviously studied for a long time amongst, on the denotified issue. And she brought it out quite well, but I'd like to reiterate that, when you say criminal tribes, the 1871 Act identified and notified communities, class, tribe, gangs of communities, gangs of people who are addicted to committing non-bailable offenses, right? So that this is the exact phrasing of the Criminal Tribes Act. And the Governor General had the powers to notify such communities, right? And these communities were notified from time to time. Please understand that, this was not a one time act. They were notified, they were denotified, they were notified again, some other communities were notified. The Act 1870 Act, 71 Act also was amended quite, on 2, 3 occasions in 1911, in 1924, and 1944, right? And there were newer provisions that were introduced, more stringent provisions that were introduced, that basically said, and that gave wide-ranging powers to the police to then target these communities, to conduct surveillance of these communities, to basically, it created this system of control, this kind of penal control of certain communities who were quote unquote addicted to committing non-bailable offenses. Now, these communities are not all tribes. And again, the question is, what is tribe? But without getting into that, let's understand that the British were coming from a very Eurocentric approach. They were on a civilizing mission when they came to India, right? And the mission was also an internal civilizing mission. There was an external civilizing mission, that yes, we are going to India and we are establishing a colonial regime there. Why? Because we are carrying the white man's burden, and these people, the Indians, need to be civilized. That is the external colonizing mission. The internal colonizing mission is the Criminal Tribes Act, that there are certain uncivilized communities, because of their so-called ethnic traits, because of their location, social location, etc., etc. And these communities are, the notion that they are hereditary criminals, they are born criminals, or they are into occupations, most importantly, that they are into criminal occupations, they're into an occupation of conducting crime. These kind of notions were not new to the British. You will see that, in England, in fact, there was the Vagrancy Act, right? For vagrants, for people who wander, for people who migrate, for people who are nomads. So you must have heard of tribes like the Romas and the Gypsies and the Sintis, and they were criminalized in England, in the UK, in Europe, right? And there was also something called as the Habitual Offenders Act in England, right? Even before they came, they enacted the Criminal Tribes 1871 Act in India. So they were already coming with the notion of certain wandering communities, certain communities with a different kind of, ethnic background, and they were already criminalizing those communities over there. When they came to India, they obviously found a suitable refuge, and I'm using these words from a brilliant article published in the EPW by Mukul Kumar. It's called, and I would suggest that everyone reads that article. It's called Caste and Crime in Colonial India. And he talks about how the caste system served as a suitable refuge for this notion of hereditary criminality that the British was carrying, of criminalizing certain communities. And this notion was extended, and the Criminal Tribes Act came into being. Yes, but who are these communities? Are they all tribes? Coming to that question, let me tell you that there are many scheduled caste communities that were notified. One of them, notably, is the Chamar community, right? In Ramnarayan Rawat's book called Reconsidering Untouchability, yes, Chamars in the North Indian provinces, he talks about how the Chamar community, in fact, which we know as a Dalit community, was in fact criminalized by the same act, and they were seen as community that is addicted to committing non-bailable offenses. The Dome and Pasi community, again, which is again recognized as this, usually a Dalit community from Bihar, they were notified under the Criminal Tribes. The Matang or the Mang community from Maharashtra, to which Annabhav Sathe belongs, he in fact wrote a lot about nomadic and denotified communities. But that community, again, recognized, seen, known as Dalit community, again, is a this thing, a community that was criminalized by the act. So what I'm trying to say is, so tribe is essentially a misnomer, and if we go with a very caste and tribe essentialist approach and understanding the denotified issue, we will never reach there. So to understand the denotified issue, one will have to deconstruct this very essentialist understanding of caste and tribe as these isolated silos. right? And one will have to go beyond that and deconstruct these notions to understand the myriad, marginality and marginalizations that the community faces. The other myth that I would like to deconstruct is that DNTs do not have a separate category. At least at the central level, or in different states, some states are making these attempts. In states like Maharashtra, you have VJ community and NT community separately categorized. In Tamil Nadu, you will probably have the DNCs. They are called the DNCs, categorized separately, but otherwise you don't really find them in a separate category. So they are in the broad spectrum of SC, ST, OBC. And whether these broad spectrum of SC, ST, OBC really defines their location is another question, because denotified communities are an afterthought for the idea of the modern, the modern Indian idea, right? The post-colonial modern India never gave them a thought. So they have been just included in categories as and when, and if at all they've had any kind of political bargaining power for that matter, they have tried to fit themselves in certain categories. But just because a community which is a denotified community, if you find them in OBCs, doesn't mean that they are a Shudra community. Or you find them in STs doesn't mean that they are an Adivasi community. Like there are different layers to it. So I would like to deconstruct that aspect as well. The other thing is, and the other myth that I wanted to bust was the fact that whenever you talk about denotified communities, there is this understanding, and the point at which we start is the colonial era, you know and it's like the colonial masters have marginalized these communities, and that is the understanding, and we limit ourselves to that, and we do not go to the pre-colonial era to see whether these communities were being marginalized, were being targeted, were being subject to similar kinds of oppression before that. You know, and I think this article on caste and criminality, and how the notions of hereditary criminality have been even before the British came to India. British have formalized it and solidified it by enacting this legislation called the Criminal Tribes Act. Yes, but did it exist? Did it not exist before that? That myth, I think we need to bust, and we need to discover, and we need to, that is an area that we will have to look at in future. Coming to my paper and what I was discussing, I really wanted to look about the constitution, and I honestly felt that denotified communities have been orphaned in the constitution making process. There was nobody to represent the denotified communities even in the constitution making process. And if one is to go before, in the constitution making process and the process that preceded the constitution, the different commissions such as the Sharps Commission and the Simon Commission and other commissions, that really gave rights to scheduled castes, that recognized as ex-untouchable communities, and scheduled tribes as that time were talked about in various commissions as hill tribes. But there was another, community and group that was being discussed through these commissions, these pre-constitution commissions, whether it was the Sharps Commission or Simon Commission and all these commissions. And it was the community of criminal tribes, right? Or criminalized tribes. And you will see that it is only this community that doesn't find mention in the constitution, and when it does find mention, I will tell you how it finds mention. In fact, I wanted to read out one passage from Untouchables, uh, written by Dr. Ambedkar, and where he talks about three communities as avarna communities, that communities that came outside the Varna system, and they're not the Shudra communities. So he talks about, besides the Shudras, so this is the book, The Untouchables, 1948. And he says, besides the Shudras, the Hindu civilization has produced three social classes whose existence has not received the attention it deserves. The three classes are: one, the criminal tribes who number around 20 million or so; two, the aboriginal tribes whose number is about 15 million or so; and three, the untouchables whose number about 50 million or so. So these are the three communities that, even Dr. Ambedkar recognized as avarna communities, and whose condition was, who were living in extremely debilitating conditions. In fact, in one of the discussions before Sharp's commission, he's asked about criminal tribes, and you'll be surprised as to what he says. He says that he's asked that, do you treat criminal tribes as untouchables? And he says that no, they're not untouchables. Then he's probed and he's asked further, and he says that, do you think that they would be treated as untouchables? And he says that once the criminal tribes settle in the mainstream society, they will definitely experience untouchability and the practice of untouchability. And this is, these are the complexities and the nuances that I want, us to really talk about, and not adopt a very essentialist approach, and really talking about denotified tribes and getting a denotified perspective will help us look at, the myriad levels of marginalization that denotified tribes face. The worst of caste marginalization, the worst of tribal marginalization, the worst of ethnic marginalization based on ethnicity, right? Coming to the constitution, and like I said, the constitution orphaned the criminal tribes. You found that in the discussions before the constitution, there were these three communities: the hill tribes or the aboriginal tribes, now recognized as scheduled tribes; then the ex-untouchable communities, now recognized as scheduled caste; but then the third, that was the criminal tribes, now no recognition for that community within the constitution. But you interestingly find them in one place in the constitution, and that is entry 15 of the seventh schedule of the constitution. Now, what is the seventh schedule? Seventh schedule of the Indian constitution is a schedule that gives you different lists, for enacting laws, right? So there is a state list where the state has powers to enact laws on certain subject. There is a central list where central government has the center has power to enact laws on certain subjects, and then there is the concurrent list, and we must have heard of these lists. Now, if you look at the entry 15, it falls in the state list. And what is this entry? The entry talks about a subject of legislation, and who or what is the subject of legislation. The subject of legislation is vagrant and migratory tribes. So when they do feature in the Indian constitution, they do feature as subjects that need to be legislated upon. And I'll tell you what this is. So the 1871 Act, when it came into being, it had, it was enacted under certain provisions. And basically, if you look at what is the administrative skeleton of the Indian constitution, it is the 1935 Government of India Act. So we have adopted the administrative skeleton, the British administrative skeleton, as it is in the constitution. And you interestingly see that vagrant and migrant communities as subjects of legislation did feature in the 1935 Act, and it did feature in this entire administrative scheme of the British at that time. And the 1871 Criminal Tribes Act, that criminalized communities, that targeted them, that gave a system of penal control of certain communities, that was actually emanating from this, provision of making laws on vagrant and migrant communities to target them. And you see that very draconian provision, the basis of that very draconian provision, you see it reflected in the Indian constitution, and it is as it is. Even today, even till date, you see that entry 15 exists, which is really a marker and a reminder that, the Criminal Tribes Act still exists, and not just anywhere, it also exists in the constitution, right? Coming to the denotification of the communities and the Habitual Offenders Act, Ms. Agarwal, talked about how the Habitual Offenders Act is just a sequel to the Criminal Tribes Act. The Criminal Tribes Act was repealed, so to say, on paper, and there was a committee that was set up, the Iyengar Committee, which was to repeal the Criminal Tribes Act. The committee made really good observations about how it was a draconian legislation and oppressive legislation, so on and so forth. But what the committee did? The committee did not stop there. The committee gave way to the Habitual Offenders Act, and the committee said that yes, we should repeal the Criminal Tribes Act, but we should have a law that identifies habitual offenders, people who are habituated to committing offenses, and we should have such a law at the central level. And you see that even till date, we do not, though we don't have a central Habitual Offenders Act at the central level, but many states still have the Habitual Offenders Act. If I'm not wrong, there are at least 12 to 14 states that still have this kind of law, the Habitual Offenders Act. And what this act did essentially was that in name, it ensured that, okay, this kind of of Criminal Tribes Act is repealed. It is not there on paper. But what the Criminal Tribes Act was essentially doing, which is to identify, to profile communities, to segregate them, and to put them behind bars or to target them when in custody. All of this that was being done by the Criminal Tribes Act is now being done by the Habitual Offenders Act, right? And it is the same communities that are being targeted, right? Because we still have that colonial hangover. We still have the same criminal justice administration, the same police system, and the same legal system that is being carried forward, right? So what you have in effect is, and that's why I say that, when the Habitual Offenders Act came in, and the Criminal Tribes Act was repealed, what we did have is a system where the communities were denotified, but they were not decriminalized, right? Sorry. So they were denotified, but they were not decriminalized. So you had the Criminal Tribes Act repealed, but the Criminal Tribes Act was not abolished. It was still in existence. And you see that the Habitual Offenders Act is one such provision, but there are other provisions, such as in CRPC, you see a provision specifically for habitual offenders. So there is section 110 of the CRPC, which is retained as it is, as a spirit of the Criminal Tribes Act. And that provision actually identifies people as habitual offenders, people who are habituated to committing these offenses. And they are often, your Sansis and Pardis and Charas and Sabars and Kuruvars. They are definitely, most of the times they are these communities, though there needs to be some authentic study on who are the communities that are being targeted by these provisions, but they definitely are, and my experience has been that it is these communities that are targeted. The other thing is that, there are several other laws that are still in continuation that continue to target these communities. Think, for example, in the Bombay province, you have the Bombay Anti-Beggary Act, right? And the Anti-Beggary Act does this fantastic thing of eradicating begging. And how do they do that? By criminalizing begging. So the Anti-Begging Act is actually a law that criminalizes people who are homeless, who do not have a home, who do not have a place to stay, and who beg on the streets. So homelessness in India is not just anyone is home. It's not that just anyone is homeless. In India, homelessness has a caste. It has a community location. And that often is those of the nomadic communities or the denotified communities who have been pushed into a nomadic lifestyle, where they have no home, no place to stay, and their livelihoods have been snatched from them, and rather have been criminalized. Their livelihoods have been criminalized. So most often than not, you see that it is the Pardi communities when you go in Govandi area of Mumbai, and you see that there's a lot of work on Pardis that is happening over there. And you see in the anti-begging homes, it's only the Pardi communities and the other denotified communities that are, put in those beggar homes, you know. And otherwise also, the Anti-Begging Act criminalizes communities that are communities of entertainers, who are performing on the streets. For example, you must have seen those women, who climb and balance, those kids who balance on a rope, in Maharashtra, that community is called Dombari, so Dombarache Khed and Dombari community. So that is a nomadic community. Now they are also targeted under the Anti-Begging Act, right? And they are picked up. So if you're an entertainer in a plush auditorium performing, you are celebrated in the society. Whereas if you're an entertainer and traditionally an entertainer coming from a skilled community of entertainers performing on the streets, you are either a beggar or you will be criminalized and put into a beggar's home. So this is the kind of systemic kind of criminalization through laws that is happening of these communities. There are many communities, that brew their own alcohol, right? And the fact that today you can get a license and you can legally make alcohol or produce alcohol. But on the other hand, communities that are carrying traditional knowledge of brewing alcohol, those communities are the highest targets of your Excise Act. It is the denotified communities that are being targeted under the Excise Act, and they are being criminalized under these laws. So modern legislation and law is doing nothing but, repeating what the Criminal Tribes Act is doing. In the face of it, they are saying that there is no Criminal Tribes Act, but there is a Criminal Tribes Act in operation through these laws, through the police system, through the legal system, and through the constitution as well. On that note, I'll just, try to, I think I have, how much time do I have, sir? Do I have 5 minutes?
Request to conclude as released.
Yes, I'll just conclude with one case. And this has been the most shocking case that I have come across. Before I talk about that case, I'll just like to point out one thing that I'd observed. And this is something that we need to ponder as a society. It really shook me, this case. I was representing a Pardi man from Daund of Maharashtra, this district. And he was seen, he died in custody, in police custody. For 45 days, he was not produced before the magistrate. The law mandates that if you are arrested by the police, you will have to, be produced within 24 hours before this magistrate. The man was taken from one police station to another, from Nagar to Daun to Shirur to whatever police station they could take him to, under different cases and completely different offenses. When he was arrested in a rape offense. Well, when he was arrested in a rape offense, he was not even named in that offense. The FIR did not have a name. So this is an unknown FIR of rape. And they go to a Pardhi Vasti and they pick up a Pardhi man because they can't find anybody, right? He is taken from one police station to another for 45 days. And finally, he's found dead in custody. And it was a shocking case. Nothing really happens in any of these Pardhi cases or any of these Kuruvar or any of these Chara cases, honestly, because the system is designed in such a manner. And when I was called by the family to visit their place, I saw something very shocking. And when I entered, you usually enter someone's house, you see certificates, that I have this degree and that degree and so forth, hanging in their houses. This is a small, shack that they were living in. Most of these communities do not have pakka houses, and they were living in that shack, and something was laminated and was hanging, and I wanted to see what that was. And when I saw, it was actually an acquittal order of his father. So the community, as in the family, had scores of cases against them because they are from the Pardi community, which is a denotified community. But that why they were hanging, and I asked them, why you are hanging a court's acquittal order in your house? They said that that is a proof of our innocence. That acquittal order, that one person from our family was acquitted, is a proof of our innocence. And for them, people hang different kinds of certificates, but this is the kind of certificates that Pardis, Sasis, Charas are hanging. In this free nation that we talk about, people are criminalized and tagged at birth, but the basic right of being innocent is also not present for or there for denotified communities. One last incident that I want to really point your attention to, and this is one case we should know about, is called the Ankush Maruti Shinde case of 2018, where six men from Vadar community, another denotified community from Maharashtra, were picked up in a gang rape, dacoity offense. Again, like I said, in none of these offenses, the FIR originally names these people. They just go to a basti, Vadar basti, Pardi basti, and they will pick people. They picked 6 men from the community because who is going to really defend them? The Sessions Court, without really looking into the case or the evidence really well, sentenced them, convicted them of gang rape and murder. They were awarded death penalty, 6 men. And for 16 years continuously, they were behind bars. They were, in judicial custody. They were imprisoned, and not just imprisoned, but they were on death row. That means that they were in anda cells. They were in isolation, right? This case reaches High Court. The High Court upholds the conviction, says they are criminals. They come to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court says, yes, they are criminals. They uphold the death sentence. Now, one good lawyer named Yug Chaudhary, well-intentioned, does a pro bono case, and he says that no, they are not criminals, they are innocent. And he files a review in the Supreme Court. And in the review, the court observes that there is no evidence in the case. There is no evidence against these people. And the court observes that they were falsely implicated in the case. And for 16 years, they were lying. They were literally incarcerated and they were lying in judicial custody for such a long time. When they came out, one of those who was accused and later on he was acquitted, the court basically awarded 5 lakh compensation for each person, which I don't think those 16 years of that they were punished, I think has anything to really one can't fathom that what 5 lakh is going to do. But one of the accused was minor when he was arrested. He was 17 years old. So, this is the status of our criminal justice administration via denotified communities. It's not just the police. It doesn't end at the police. It's not that the courts are doing any better. It's not that the prison system is doing any better for them. So, on that note, I think I would like to end my talk.
Thank you, Desai. Since Professor Bhange has joined us, so